War has a long history of sparking and accelerating invention. From a rolling rocket bomb to balloon bombs, these are 5 strangest weapons of carnage and destruction you should know. Number 5. Man-Lifting Kite. During World War I, militaries across the globe were keenly interested in finding ways to start killing in the air. They had already mastered earth, fire, and water, but aviation had barely lifted off, so armies experimented with the new air forces by simply throwing stuff into the air and seeing what happened. This was the age of biplanes, zeppelins, and unfortunately for pilots, giant kites. Means of flight were generally used for reconnaissance and battlefield observation. The problem was that the giant balloons and planes were easily popped by artillery, so armies started experimenting with kites, which were much harder to shoot down. A typical way of getting a soldier into the air was to first fly a lead kite to test wind conditions, followed by additional kites to add lift until the string could support the weight of a man. The brave passenger, perched on a narrow seat, was then raised into the air while a ground crew manipulated winches and ropes to keep the system stable. The most successful man kite was invented in Great Britain in June 1904 by the flamboyant American showman Mr. Samuel Franklin Cody, who would become a prominent pioneer in early British aviation. His series of demonstrations were so successful in winds exceeding 40 miles per hour that Colonel John E. Capper, officer commanding the Balloon Section, Royal Engineers, wrote in his report to the War Office that, "I cannot speak too strongly as to the excellence of these kites as regards their design and ability to perform what Mr. Cody claims for them. The man-lifting kites will take a man into the air to practically any required height, and will keep him steady there so that he can observe. No other kites that I have read or heard of can approach them in sturdiness and security combined with lifting power." Despite never being used operationally, kites remained in use with both the US and Army up until the beginning of the First World War. The Army list of August 1914 includes a kite section of the RFC stationed at South Farnborough. The section, however, was disbanded shortly afterwards. Number 4. Panon Drum Devil Wheel. The list of failed inventions during wartime is long, but must surely be led by a device whose test ended with a dog chasing an errant rocket and generals running for their lives alongside members of the general public. The Panon drum has to be one of the craziest, most explosively unsuccessful flops in modern military history. Invented by Colonel Charles Robert Finch Noyes as a means of breaking through formidable German defenses on the beaches of Normandy, the weapon consisted of a couple of 10-foot-high steel wheels with 70 rockets strapped to its felloes. In theory, the Panon drum would shoot across the beach at highway speeds, hit the concrete wall, and blow a hole big enough for a tank to roll through. Everyone thought it would be a quick, efficient way to storm the beach, saving the lives of countless soldiers facing landmines, obstacles, and machine gun fire. But nothing could be more untrue. The biggest problem with the Panon drum was control. It was impossible for the rolling bomb to go straight off the landing craft and up the beach towards its target. In an effort to solve this problem, project lead Neville Shute Norway, an aeronautical engineer and novelist, had a third wheel fitted to the Panon drum for stability. It didn't help. In a subsequent attempt, they tried to steer the Panon drum with steel cables, so naturally the steel cables snapped and almost decapitated one of the operators. Even the rocket-propelled Devil Wheel nearly ran over an officer's dog. Norway and his team admitted that they had not created the weapon that would break through the Atlantic Wall. Well, we like to think that maybe one particular World War I veteran saw some potential in the Panon drum. Number 3. Fugo Japanese Balloon Bombs. At some point during World War II, scientists in Japan figured out a way to harness a brisk airstream that sweeps eastward across the Pacific Ocean to dispatch silent and deadly devices to the American mainland. They developed the project Fugo, which consisted of sending bomb-carrying balloons from Japan to set fire to the vast forests of America, in particular those of the Pacific Northwest. These balloons, or envelopes, designed by the Japanese Army, were made of lightweight paper fashioned from the bark of trees. They were 33 feet in diameter and could lift approximately 1,000 pounds. Attached were bombs composed of sensors, powder pack tubes, triggering devices, and other simple and complex mechanisms. The Japanese knew that only some of the balloons would reach America, but if they were lucky, the balloon would drop its payload on a well-populated city. Otherwise, it would hit a rural area and start a massive forest fire, which we're pretty sure can still be considered a win. In late autumn 1944, the Japanese released 9,000 balloons, of which about 1,000 managed to reach the United States, some flying as far as Detroit. One even threatened the American nuclear project when the balloon landed on a high-tension line carrying power to a nuclear reactor. At first, the Americans were stumped as to the balloon's origin, but closer investigation of some of the debris revealed Japanese characters, which is pretty incriminating. Not wanting the Japanese to know that the balloons were actually working, the US embarked on one of the most enterprising censorship campaigns of the war and covered up evidence of the damage the balloons had caused, presumably attributing all the random explosions to atomic monsters. In 1945, the Japanese thought their balloons were a bust and halted the program, when in reality these weapons were considered a serious threat for Americans. Number 2. Submarine Dragon Kings. Around the 14th and 15th centuries, the Chinese had already mastered landmines, but were getting increasingly angry at enemy junks floating safely up and down their rivers. So they decided to go even further and add sea mines to their arsenals. Key objectives for a Chinese offensive mine strategy would be blockading enemy bases, harbors, and sea lanes, destroying enemy sea transport capabilities, attacking or restricting warship mobility, and crippling and exhausting enemy combat strength. Called Submarine Dragon Kings, the sea mines were submerged wrought iron cases packed with explosives enclosed in watertight ox bladders. The explosives would stay dry, but with no oxygen they couldn't be ignited. To solve this problem, the ancient Chinese developed an extended fuse that would run from the mine's payload through a snorkel made from goat intestines to a float on the surface disguised with duck feathers, proving that above all else, the ancient Chinese wanted their weapons to be absolutely efficient. Another Chinese war manual describes a later model, wherein the timed fuse was replaced by a remote ignition device. By using a cord pulled from the shore, the mine was activated by a flint and steel firing mechanism that created a spark in the submerged payload and destroyed any nearby target. Number 1. Delacortehz1 Aerocycle. Military engineers often come up with nifty but strangely odd designs for people navigation, but seldom any as weird as the HZ-1 Aerocycle. It was an American one-man personal helicopter developed by Delacortehz Helicopters in the mid-1950s. Intended to be operated by inexperienced pilots with a minimum of 20 minutes of instruction, the HZ-1 was expected to become a standard reconnaissance machine with the United States Army. The helicopter was supposed to work in a similar way to another goofy vehicle, the Segway. The pilot steered the craft using his own body weight, which activated controls on the rotors mounted under it. It was supposed to be intuitive, using kinesthetic control, which engineers thought would be easy to use without much instruction or practice. The Aerocycle was similar to a motorcycle, having a twist-grip throttle. The engine was a marine outboard motor, while the original landing gear included affixed airbags at each end of the frame, with a rubber float running down the middle. Eventually, this changed to helicopter skids. There were even safety features. The pilot was secured with a safety harness, which also secured the outboard motor engine. It is interesting to imagine what the safety harness would protect should the craft go out of control. The Aerocycle was first tested in November 1954 and January 1955. The US Army was pleased with the test results. They envisioned an air cavalry in the same vein as the horse cavalry, so ordered a dozen to be produced. The next round of trials in 1956 did not go as well. Inexperienced pilots did not seem to be able to fly as well as was reported in the earlier test. Captain Selmer Sundby ultimately noted that the craft was not safe for untrained soldiers to operate. The Aerocycle failed to live up to the hype, so the project was scrapped. Sundby, however, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his work. One Aerocycle survives and can be viewed at the U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Eustis. Nothing drives human creativity more than a dire need for new ways to kill each other. That's why war is often a time of great technological progress. But apart from the strange inventions previously mentioned, armies also carried out creepy experiments as hell. If you want to know some of them, click on this video.